This morning we'll be looking at Job, beginning in chapter 29. As we do, children, if you're headed out the door to Children's Church, you're welcome to go now. If you want to stay in here with us, we are always glad to have you here with us as well. This morning in Job 29 through 31, 3 chapters, I really have 3 questions that I want us to try and answer. Maybe they're questions you've thought something similar as you've gone through the book of Job. There's really 3 questions. The first, why did God give us these 3 chapters to start with? You know, when we write school papers, you probably did this, where you say, I've got 5 pages to write and I only have 4 pages worth of content. And we all know what that last page ends up being like. Or maybe you're a little more sophisticated and you intersperse and you figure out, I've definitely done this, where I say I need a few more pages, so you go to the end of a paragraph. If I just add 3 words, I'll get a whole extra line out of this paragraph. Like, we do stuff like that. God doesn't do that. He didn't think Job has to be 42 chapters. What am I going to do with these extra section? So God gave us Job 29 through 31 for a reason. He put it in the text for a reason. Second question, which is related, not only why did he put it in the text, why did he give it to us? And I would say even, why did he bring us to this section of 3 chapters at Berean Bible Church on March 17th of 2024? And then maybe another question that would come to your mind is, why did it happen for Job? If God only was doing something for you and I through these 3 chapters, we might say, well, that's good. But why did he do it for Job? Really, that's the 3 questions I want to try to answer by the end of today. Why is this here? Why do we need to see it? Why did Job need it to happen? Because God could have gone straight from the end of chapter 28. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. He could have jumped to we call them the God speeches at the end of the book of Job. He could have ended with, here God showed up, Job says, you're right, and God blesses him again. Could have been a nice little happy ending on a rough story, sure. But why do we need these 3 chapters? I'm going to give you the summary to start with. Here's what basically happens in the chapters. In chapter 29, Job longs for the past, when God's friendship was with him, that's the way he describes it, and when Job experienced prosperity and honor because he had acted according to God's ways. Job longs for that in chapter 29. Chapter 30, Job mourns the current situation where he doesn't experience prosperity, he experiences suffering. He doesn't experience honor and respect, he experiences dishonor and mocking. So Job mourns that. He describes what he feels like is God's absence. And then in chapter 31, the whole chapter, Job attempts to justify himself. And that's not just us saying, well, what is Job doing and trying to figure out. That's actually the term that God uses through the mouth of Elihu. If you were to turn over to chapter 32, the next person who will speak is angry at Job's friends for a different reason, but he's angry at Job. The end of verse 2 says, because Job justified himself, self-justification. He justified himself rather than God. That's what chapter 31 is. So why, at the end of a whole long 28 chapters of description of Job, do we get 3 more chapters where Job says, it used to be really good, and now it's really bad, and I'm going to try to justify myself? I hope in the next 30 minutes or so, we get to that answer. But first, we need to ask, what does it mean to justify myself? And not just what does it mean, what does it look like? What is self-justification? Job and his friends have this system in their mind. Here's how things work. This is how I make sense of everything. Good people have good things happen to them, and bad people have bad things happen to them. That's their system. They say, this is how I'm going to make sense of it. Now they'd say, well, we know not every moment, but on the whole, if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. That's their system of understanding. That's the rules by which they interpret life. Job gets to chapter 31 and he assumes that, and then he says, if I had sinned in these ways, this is what his self-justification looks like. He says, God, I would understand it if I had done wrong like that person. I would understand why I have sufferings if I hadn't been trying to follow after you. But I have been trying to follow after you. That's what his self-justification looks like. It's when you work within your understanding, your system of understanding that you work out, whatever that is, and you point to something about yourself, and you say, see, I'm right, or I'm good, and therefore, because of something in me, I deserve something. That could be comfort or prosperity. That could be a good family. That could be salvation, heaven. There's all kinds of things we think I deserve, but the basic framework of self-justification is I look at myself and I say either here's some good things that I've done or here's some wrong things that I haven't done. Either direction. And I say, based on that, I'm right or I'm good and I deserve comfort, prosperity, a good family, salvation. We do this kind of thing to try and maintain a good self-image for ourselves or get approval from other people. It is reflexive. And it's subtle because we can point to all kinds of things. I can say, here's my good works. Here's the things I did. I was kind to that person. I gave to church or to missions. I went on a missions trip. I read my Bible this week. I prayed. We point to all kinds of things and say, see, look at me. Therefore, this is what should happen. I'm playing within my own little rules of, okay, if people read their Bible, good things should happen to them. And I'm pointing at it saying, see, I did this. Here's where I should end up. That's what self-justification is. Well, you can look at our lack of bad works, like I mentioned. You could say, I haven't committed murder. I haven't committed adultery. I haven't lied too much, at least. I haven't cheated. I haven't been angry and losing my temper and attacking people. I haven't done all these things, and I point at something about me, and I say, see, I'm right or I'm good in some way, therefore I deserve something. That's what self-justification looks like. We can compare ourselves with others. It may not be I did good works or didn't do bad works, but at least I didn't do their bad works. I'm still pointing at me to say I'm right, and therefore these bad things shouldn't happen to me and these good things should. Sometimes we point at our sacrifices. Look at all the stuff I've given up for you, God. When there's difficulties in your life, this is my, I felt this instinct. God used this text to work me over this week. I felt this instinct in me when something happened that wasn't what I wanted to happen. And my reflex, not what I thought about and planned, but my reflex was like, God, I've been trying to follow you. Why'd you let this happen? Why didn't you work this thing out? Because I've been trying to read my Bible. I've been trying to serve you. I've been trying to do all of these things. I haven't chased that sin, which maybe I've done before. I haven't done these wrong things. Here's something about me. God, why would this, that's the reflex that we feel so much. Why would you bring this difficulty? Why wouldn't you work it out the way I want you to work it out when I've been doing all these things? It's not self-justification to say, God, why did you put this in my life? That's not justification at all yet. It's a question. But as soon as I say, why did you put this in my life when I've been doing this? I'm pointing at me and trying to justify myself to say I should deserve something. These 3 chapters, that's driving Job. Before we look at it more, let's take a moment and pray. Let's ask God for his help. Father, you know our tendency to look at ourselves, what we've done or what we haven't done, and to justify ourselves in our thinking before others or before you. Work by your grace to expose that scheme in our hearts this morning. Give us such a hunger and thirst for your righteousness, the justification that you give by grace alone, through faith in Jesus Christ alone. Lord, make us dissatisfied with our attempts to justify ourselves and quench that thirst with the living water that comes through Jesus this morning. In his name, amen. So we're going to go through these 3 chapters, and we're going to call it a wellness check on Job. Like, drop in and say, Job, how you doing? What's going on? Chapter 29, verse 2, Job begins, "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me. When God's lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness as I was in my prime. When the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me." He longs for good times, and he says, there was a time in my life when I felt God's presence and blessings. His friendship was on my life. I didn't walk in darkness. I knew where I was headed, and I knew what was good and right. There was a time when that was the case. He continues to describe there were blessings. His children were with him. Verse 6, when my steps were washed with butter. That probably doesn't sound like a good thing to you. You probably wouldn't like that. But butter was valuable, and he's saying when I had so much of the luxuries that I could just wash my steps with them. And the rock poured out for me streams of oil. Again, luxury just poured in his life. When I went out to the gate of the city, I prepared my seat in the square. The young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. It's not saying that they were like afraid of him and ran away. He's saying that they had respect for him. His blessings started with material blessings. He knew God's presence and friendship. He had material blessings. There was honor. If you read from 7 down through 11, you see him talking about the princes refrained from talking. Job's like, when I walked into the room, I was respected as someone who had wisdom. The governors, the rulers said, wait, we want to know what Job has to say. Not only that, but he thought he had a confident future. We'll come back to the middle section, but skip down to verse 18. Job thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots spread out to the waters with the dew all night on my branches. My glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Just to take one of those pictures, the last one, my bow ever new in my hand. Back in that day when you didn't have, modern compound bows, and you certainly didn't have guns, to have a new bow meant you could fire with power. You had strength. And not only that, if you ever tried to actually draw a bow like that, you'd better have strength or you won't be able to use it. Job's saying, I thought I would go through my whole life and I would have strength and power, nourishment, stability, all the way until I died. Well, why? Why did Job think that? If you go back to verse 12. Because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. So put yourself in the flow. He says, God's presence is with me. His friendship is with me. I had material blessings. I had honor. And I thought it was going to last forever. Why did he have those blessings? What Job thought, God's presence is on me. I have blessings because, to summarize, I've done good things. I've cared for the people who were in need, orphans, widows. I've fought the people who were unrighteous. I broke the fangs of unrighteousness. That's the way Job describes what he longs for. So you get to chapter 30. Now Job still believes that he had done those good works. He's not here saying, oh, I actually hadn't done good things. We can know that. We can go to the verse 25 of chapter 30. Job says, did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? He hasn't changed his tune. He says, I've done these good things. But now there's suffering. He describes dishonor first. Remember, he was honored. Now he describes dishonor. And it's interesting the way he describes it. We won't read the whole first 10 verses, but he basically says, now people look at me with disrespect, and I wouldn't have even hired their fathers to watch my sheep. That's his language. It's like these people who now look at me and are like, clearly Job didn't know anything. Clearly Job wasn't following God. Clearly Job shouldn't be listened to. Job looks at it and says, not only would I not have hired them, I wouldn't have even hired their fathers. There's dishonor. Down towards the end of the chapter, he's described, he says, I'm a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. You go, what does that have to... That might sound like fun to some of you, go be friends with an ostrich. But the point is, jackals and ostriches didn't live in the city. They were outcast, if you will. To be a companion of ostriches is like you're living like Tarzan raised by wolves because the humans won't let you be there. Mowgli raised by wolves, Tarzan apes, either way. You're out in the distance. He's like, I used to be honored sitting in the very seat where everyone, even the princes, want to hear me. The young, the old, they all say, what do you have to say because we see your wisdom. Now I'm cast out and I'm hanging out with the ostriches in the desert. Not only is there dishonor, there's physical and emotional torment. Look at verse 16. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. Kind of uncomfortable to read it, isn't it? With great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. Down to verse 27, my inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. Can you sympathize with those feelings? You have days where you feel like my insides just won't calm down. They're flipping over with worry and pain and difficulty. And you're laying awake at night at 3 a.m. And you feel like my soul has just been poured out, and what's the point? The pain that gnaws me takes no rest. It's uncomfortable, which is why we ask the question, and we're going to come back to it. Well, why did God give us this? Why does God want you to be uncomfortable looking at the suffering of Job? Because he does. So Job, in this chapter, he mourns, I've done the good works, but now there's dishonor, and there's physical and emotional torment, and I don't feel the friendship of God. Notice verse 19. and think honestly in your soul, have you felt this way? God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind, you make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death into the house appointed for all living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand and in his disaster cry for help? Notice his self-justification. Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came. And when I waited for light, darkness came. Job he thinks about God and he says, God, you're silent. Have you felt that? Have you cried out for something that you knew was good and you wanted it to happen? You say, God is silent. Not only silent, but when Job stands, God only looks at him. The picture here is even worse than feeling like God is not here. It's God, you're right there and you see me and you ignore me. But even worse, not completely ignore, not like I've got my back turned, but you stand and just stare at me while I suffer with no response. That is the feeling of Job's soul in this text. And he concludes, well, God, you must be cruel. He says, the might of your hand is against me. Job feels like, God, I know you have all power, but you're using all power to bring suffering to me. That is the angst and suffering and pain in Job's soul, and it's uncomfortable for us to read it, much less for him to be in it. There's a warning here for us. The way that you view prosperity can be devastating when suffering comes. Say it again. The way that you view prosperity can be devastating when suffering comes. That's one reason, by the way, when you read Job, this book is not only here for when you suffer. It's here so that you know God rightly, so that when you prosper, you think correctly about it. See, Job, if we were to summarize, he said, God's presence is on me, which I see and experience in God's blessings, which happen because I've done good works. That's the way he describes it in chapter 29. Once suffering comes, he says, well, I still did the good works. Now the blessings aren't here. So what does that mean about God? See, the problem is he had the wrong view of prosperity to start with. We could illustrate this in our lives. If it was a parent who had good children, and if your thought was, God, He's with me, and He's blessed me with good children because I've got this parenting thing figured out. First off, that's a terrible plan. And we're usually more subtle than that. So how about God is with me, and He's blessed me with good children because I've really tried to follow His word in parenting them. Go like, that doesn't sound so bad. That's because following His word is not bad. But the problem with that is the word because. That's Job's problem. That's why Job is wrecked right now. Because what happens when your child is whatever age you want to pick, 18, 25? What if they go off and live in a way that you really don't want them to? What if they go off and maybe they don't live in a terrible way, but they are diagnosed with cancer that will end their life before yours? When the suffering comes, in Job's system, God's presence has brought blessings because this is what I've done. In Job's system, when suffering comes, you only have two choices. Either, well, what evil did I do, which will tear you up? You say, well, my child's off doing the wrong thing. What did I do wrong? We felt that. Are there times when we've done wrong things? Sure. But in Job's system of understanding, you only have two choices when suffering comes. Either, what evil did I do? That was Job's friends' answers. Job, you must have done something terrible to get this. Or, why did God leave and is he my enemy? In that system of understanding, that's the only two choices. Take another example. If you have a businessman who is following God's principles of wisdom in his business and says, God's presence has been with me, he's blessed, I'm making good money, I'm doing really well, he's blessed because of what I have done. Because is the problem here. He's blessed because I have done these things. Well, what happens when the investment fails? What happens when someone takes advantage of you? You only have two choices. Either, God, did I stop doing the right thing? What evil did I do? Or, God, why did you leave me and are you my enemy? The way you view prosperity can devastate you when suffering comes. So you might ask, well, how do you change that? Because I'm supposed to follow after God, of course. I'm supposed to parent according to biblical principles. I'm supposed to do business according to God's wisdom. So what's the difference? Well, here's the thing. Good works are not a merit that means you are owed something. You can parent your kids according to biblical principles the best you possibly can, and that does not mean that God is in your debt to give you children like you want. You can act according to wise principles in your business, and that does not mean that God is indebted to give you prosperity through your business. They're not a merit. Good works don't earn these things. They are, however, a means. So, how does God give blessings of a good family to parents? Well, he very often does it through biblical parenting. He gives prosperity often through biblical wisdom. Not because he owes that to you because you did some stuff and like, if God doesn't hold up his end of the bargain, I've got something to be upset about. But because God has said, look, these good principles are part of the means by which I bless you. But Job's not there. Job hears God's presence brought blessings because I did these things. And so that leads him into chapter 31, where he frames this as an oath of innocence. He says, if I have done these sins, then you go ahead and strike me down. He uses different graphic terms, but broadly. Let my arm fall out of my socket if I've done these sins. Listen to his justification, the things that he points to, and that we have no reason from the book of Job to think he's not right in saying, I've not sinned in these areas. Just listen. Verse 1 of chapter 31, I've made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? It says, I have treated my eyes like a captive servant and made a commitment to purity. Verse 5, if I have been deceitful, Job says, I have not done this. I have not been deceitful. Verse 7, if I have turned to anything, if my heart has followed after my eyes, if anything other than God looked appealing and I said, this is valuable, if I've done that, God punished me like this. He says, I would understand all the suffering if I had done that. If I have not, verse 9, if I have coveted another person's wife, Job says, in my heart, I have not even coveted after another person's wife. Verse 13, if I have not shown compassion to my servants, I'll paraphrase some of these. You can scan across them. If I have failed, verse 16, to show compassion to the poor or the widow. If I've failed to give clothing or covering to one who needed it, verse 19. Verse 21, if I have failed to care for the orphans around me. Verse 24, if I have trusted in or loved my money. Verse 26, this may look a little strange to us. He says, if I have looked at the sun when it shone or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, in that day they would worship the sun and the moon. He's saying, if I have even secretly, even when nobody knew, if I looked up at the sun and worshiped the sun god like the people around me, if I've worshiped the false gods of people around me, even in secret, then I would understand all of this suffering. Verse 31, if I've not provided for people I'm responsible for, men within his household. Verse 33, just in case you could get through all that and say, I don't know, I think maybe I have those things right too, which I doubt it. But if you get to verse 33, Job says, if I have concealed or hidden my transgressions as others do, by hiding my iniquity in my heart, because I stood in great fear of the multitude and the contempt of families terrified me. If I've hidden my sin at all because I was afraid somebody else would see it and think badly of me. Job says, any one of these things, this whole list of stuff, if any of these were true, I would understand why I have this suffering. But Job is justifying himself. He says, but I have not done any of these things. So what's the result of our wellness check on Job, if you will? His soul is wrecked. He's just confused, hurt, despairing, depressed, angry. I mean, none of the characteristics of a healthy soul are really Job. So why? Our three questions. Why did God do this in Job's life? Why did he do it to such a good person as Job? And why did God give us this insight into a hurting soul for March 17th, 2024? First, why did God do it in Job's life? Because Job had wisdom and a really good relationship to God. Remember where the book starts. In fact, flip back over to Job chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Feared God, turned away from evil. Now go to the end of chapter 28. At the end of all this section about wisdom, God says to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. That could have made a wonderful bookend on the first part of Job and said, look, Job feared God and turned away from evil, and look, that's what wisdom is. But getting Job all the way there where Job says, I have wisdom, and God says, you do have wisdom, doesn't solve his problem and doesn't take away his anguish. Wisdom and understanding, at least the way Job's pursuing it, is not enough for the health of your soul. Every other religion across the world will look for the same basic things: wisdom and understanding, some kind of sense of religious awe, maybe a fear of punishment, and do some kind of good works. Go look at all the religions. They're all something like that. Get wisdom, get understanding, do good works, maybe fear punishment, depending on the religion, and experience this sense of wonder and awe. Even a lot of Christian denominations, that's all it actually is. And I would say even some Christian churches who are in good denominations, that's what it's about. Understand it rightly, get the right wisdom, put that in your head, do good things, maybe fear punishment. That's not enough for the health of your soul. It wasn't enough for Job. He had wisdom. He feared God. He did turn away from evil. But God won't leave Job there. God, in His grace, is not going to let Job stay where Job thinks, I can or I have to justify myself. What Christianity is the truth of the gospel that exposes the pointless misery of trying to justify yourself. That's what Job's in. Job's sitting here saying, I've done all this. Why has this suffering happened to me? His self-justification and his system of understanding has wrecked his soul, and that wasn't good for him. It wasn't even good for him in the good times. Think about the beginning of the book. Job's family goes, and they're enjoying a festival. They're having a great time together, and Job says, maybe they've cursed God in their hearts. I'm going to go sacrifice for them. He's worried, he's afraid that somehow this is because they have to justify themselves. If they've done the wrong thing, they won't get the blessing, they want this, so if I can do the sacrifice for them, maybe that will work. It wasn't healthy for him from the very beginning. God knew that. Why did God bring Job to this place? Because his system of understanding and his self-justification is eating away his soul. And God is going to bring him to the end of that and show him the emptiness of it so that God can show him something better. It's one reason it happened for Job. Why did God show us this lesson with such a good person as Job? Because if his claim to righteousness or blamelessness was like most of ours, we wouldn't think self-justification is the problem. We would think, I could do it better than Job. But Job's justification for himself, when he points at himself, it's way better than ours. When we read through chapter 31, I think he far outstrips anything I can do. I come to God and I say, God, I've done pretty well this week. Or, God, I've tried to be more consistent in prayer and giving and kindness. Or, God, I know I did the wrong thing in these areas, but here's why I did it. Like, that's my self-justification. Or, God, nobody's perfect. I'm not as bad as he is. Like, we have all these really pathetic, weak attempts at self-justification. Job has the best possible version of it. He's like, purity, worship, money, fear of man. If I had done any of these, I would understand it, but I haven't. God shows it to us with such a good person as Job so that we will see the solution is not try to be better than Job. The problem is with Job's self-justification. And that's why God gives it to us today. Because we are tempted to run to justify ourselves. Let me just ask some questions. When you think of the way the world works in God's world, do good people always experience comfort and prosperity? No. Are comfort and prosperity always a sign of God's blessing? No. Could flip those. Do bad people always experience suffering? No. Is suffering always a sign of God's opposition? No. The prosperity gospel that teaches if you do good, you will have these kinds of blessings is just what Job is being stripped of. Stop justifying yourself. Don't say, God blessed me because I have earned it this way, because this is true about me. We need to be stripped of that because that will wreck our souls just like it did Job. Or I could ask the question this way. Do good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell? No. Forgiven people go to heaven. And we all deserve hell. But we can have this system built up that really is a self-justifying system. Do good people go to heaven? Is there something good about them, something in them, that's self-justification, that means they get to go to heaven? Or do bad people go to heaven? It's the opposite side of, or to hell, is the opposite side of self-justification. And we say, there's something in them, something about them that means that's where they end up. We can do the same thing Job does and build a whole system around good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And what there is inside me is what I look to justify myself. And God's mercy to us in this text is to say, if you view him that way, it will be miserable. That's why we have 3 more chapters of misery here. Job's already got wisdom. And if you figure out all the wisdom and you get where Job is and you say, I fear God and I turn away from evil, but your heart is still built on justifying yourself, it'll be miserable. It's not going to work. My fear is that there are many people within the Christian church and that I have the same pull within me who want wisdom, some religious actions and a sense of awe, good works, and a way to understand our world and difficulties. We want all that, but our hearts are still full of self-justification. My prayer is that God will unleash the power of his gospel in our lives, because that is the only thing that can change this. Without Jesus on the cross, I will always say, here's what I did or here's what I didn't do, and that may be because of God's blessing, but I am causing this. I deserve something. Salvation, comfort, prosperity, it doesn't really matter what it is. I look at myself, and as long as I look at myself, it will be miserable because I fail. My justification will never be what Job's was. I've already blown that. And his wasn't good enough for him. Not only wasn't good enough for God, it wasn't even good enough to satisfy his soul. My prayer is that we will come to the gospel and that we will, in all of our reflexes, stop saying, I'm right, I'm good, here's what I've done, therefore I deserve this. That when suffering comes in our lives, we won't say, God, I would understand if I hadn't been following you, but I have been following you. That we'd come instead and say, God, you're right and you're good. And not here's what I've done, but here's what you have done. You took on yourself human form and lived a perfect life and died in my place, taking the punishment that I deserved, not because I had done anything to earn it, because I couldn't, but my justification is found in Jesus alone. My prayer is that when suffering comes, we can say, I may not understand. I may not ever understand. But God, you are still right and good. I remember what you've done, and I have hope and joy that I could never, ever deserve. But I can say, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. And I can say, this affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And I can say, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. I will never, ever be able to really say that if I am justifying myself. I can only say that if I rest in Christ's justification. God is graciously showing Job that self-justification will not work, and it will fill you with despair. And he wants you to know that on March 17th of 2024. And he had to show it to you with Job because if he did it with somebody who wasn't as good as Job, you would think you could do it better than he did. But you won't. Instead, we have to turn from justifying ourselves, from looking at our own righteousness at all, and look at Jesus and say, praise God for the grace he's shown me through Christ. I'll invite you to close your eyes and respond to God in prayer, and then we'll sing together in response to God's truth.